Support for this podcast comes from Troy University, dedicated to teaching a new generation to lead change. Information on leadership opportunities available to students from day one is at troy.edu/leadchange.
From Troy Public Radio, this is Alabama Aloud. I'm Don Noble. Alabama Aloud is the only podcast where you can hear Alabama stories read in their entirety. Today, I'll be reading Me and My Baby View the Eclipse by Lee Smith. Lee Smith is the author of 19 books of fiction, most recently, Silver Alert, a touching story about senior citizens. In this story, Me and My Baby View the Eclipse, we see that even in a small town, we don't know everything about one another. The story, Me and My Baby View the Eclipse, was published in the 1990 collection of the same name and is read here by permission of the author. Sharon Shaw first met her lover, Raymond Stewart, in an incident that took place in broad daylight at the Xerox machine in Stewart's Pharmacy 3 years ago. It can't be that long. Sharon just can't believe it. Every time she thinks about him now, no matter what she's doing, she stops right in the middle of it while a hot, crazy ripple runs over her entire body. This makes her feel like she's going to die or throw up. Of course, she never does either one. She pats her hair and goes right on with her busy life the way she did before she met him. But everything is different now, all altered, all new. 3 years. Her children were little then. Leonard Lee was 11, Alistair was 10, and Margaret, the baby, was only 3. Sharon was 34. Now she's over the hill, but who cares? Since the children are all in school, she and Raymond can meet more easily. "Is the coast clear?" Raymond will ask with his high, nervous giggle at her back door. Raymond speaks dramatically, emphasizing certain words. He flings his arms around. He wears huge silky handkerchiefs and gold neck chains and drives all the way to Roanoke to get his hair cut in what he calls a modified punk look. In fact, Raymond is a figure of fun in Roxborough, which Sharon knows, and this knowledge just about kills her. She wants to grab him up and soothe him, smooth down his bristling blonde hair, and press his fast-beating little heart against her deep, soft bosom and wrap him around and around in her big, strong arms. Often she does this. "Hush now, honey," she says. For Raymond is misunderstood. Roxborough is divided into 2 camps about him. The ones who call him Raymond, which is his name, and the ones who call him Ramon, with the accent on the last syllable, which is what he wants to be called. "Putting on airs just like his daddy did," sniffs Sharon's mama, who works at the courthouse and knows everything. Raymond's daddy was a pharmacist who, according to Sharon's mama, never got over not being a doctor. She says this is common among pharmacists. She says he was a dope fiend, too. Sharon doesn't know if this part is true or not, and she won't ask. The subject of his father, who killed himself, gives Raymond nervous palpitations of the heart. Anyhow, this is how Raymond came to be working at Stewart's Pharmacy, where he mostly runs the Xerox machine and helps ladies order stationery and wedding invitations from huge bound books which he keeps on a round coffee table in his conversation area. Raymond likes for things to be nice. A tall, sour-faced man named Mr. Gardner is the actual manager. Everybody knows that Raymond could never run a store. Raymond stays busy, though. He does brochures and flyers and handouts, whatever you want, on his big humming Xerox machine, and he'll give you a cup of coffee to drink while you make up your mind. This coffee is strong, sweet stuff. Sharon had never tasted anything quite like it before the day she went in there to discuss how much it would cost to print up a little cookbook of everybody's favorite recipes from the Shady Mountain Elementary School PTA, to make extra money for art. It was late August, hot as blazes outside, so it took Sharon just a minute to recover from the heat. She's a large, slow-moving woman anyway, with dark brown eyes and dark brown hair and bright, deep color in her cheeks. She has what her mother always called a peaches and cream complexion. She used to hear her mother saying that on the phone to her Aunt Marge, talking about Sharon's peaches and cream complexion and about how she was so slow and wouldn't stand up for herself. This meant going out for cheerleader. Later, these conversations were all about how Sharon would never live up to her potential, which meant marrying a doctor, a potential that went up in smoke the day Sharon announced that she was going to marry Leonard Shaw, her high school sweetheart, after all. Now Sharon talks to her mother every day on the telephone, unless, of course, she sees her, and her mother still talks every day to Sharon's Aunt Marge. Sharon has worn her pretty hair in the same low ponytail ever since high school, which doesn't seem like so long ago to her either. It seems like yesterday, in fact, and all the friends she has now are the same ones she had then, or pretty much, and her husband Leonard is the same, only older, heavier, and the years between high school and now have passed swiftly in a strong, unbroken line. They've been good years, but Sharon can't figure out where in the world they went, or tell much difference between them. Until she met Raymond, that is. Now she has some high points in her life. But met is the wrong word. Until she saw Raymond with new eyes, is how Sharon thinks of it now. She went into Stewart's that day in August and showed Raymond her typed recipes and told him what she wanted. He said he thought he could do that. What kind of paper, he wanted to know. What about the cover? Sharon hadn't considered the cover. Raymond Stewart bobbed up and down before her like a jack-in-the-box, asking questions. It made her feel faint. Or it might have been the sudden chill of the air conditioning. She'd just come from standing out in her hot backyard with the hose watering her garden. "What?" she said. Sharon had a low, pretty voice and a way of patting her hair. "Sit right down here, honey," Raymond said, "and let me get you a cup of coffee." Which he did, and it was so strong, tasting faintly of almonds. They decided to use pale blue paper, since blue and gold were the school colors. Sharon looked at Raymond Stewart while he snipped and pasted on the coffee table. "Aha!" he shrieked, and "Aha!" Little bits of paper went flying everywhere. Sharon looked around, but nobody seemed to notice. People in Stewart's were used to Raymond. She found herself smiling. Raymond said critically, laying out the pages. "And this sounds yummy," about Barbara Sutcliffe's Strawberries Romanoff. Sharon had never heard a grown man say yummy out loud before. She began to pay more attention. That day Raymond was wearing baggy, pleated tan pants. An old man's pants, Sharon thought. A Hawaiian shirt with blue parrots on it, and red rubber flip-flops. "Oh, this sounds dreadful," Raymond said, as he laid out Louise Dart's famous chicken recipe, where you spread drumsticks with apricot preserves and mustard. "Actually, it's pretty good," Sharon said. "Everybody makes that." But she was giggling. The strong coffee was making her definitely high, so high that he talked her into naming the cookbook Home on the Range, which everybody thought was just darling, as it turned out. And then he drew a cover for it, a woman in a cowboy hat and an apron tending to a whole stovetop full of wildly bubbling pans. The woman had a funny look on her face. Puffs of steam came out of some of the pots. "I used to draw," Sharon said dreamily, watching him. Raymond has small white hands with tufts of gold hair on them. "What did you draw?" He didn't look up. "Trees," Sharon said. "Pages and pages and pages of trees." As soon as she said it, she remembered it, sitting out on the porch after supper with the pad on her lap, drawing tree after tree with huge flowing branches that reached for God. She didn't tell him the part about God. But suddenly she knew she could if she wanted. You could say anything to Raymond Stewart, just the way you could say anything to somebody you sat next to on a bus. Anything. He grinned at her. His hair stood up in wild blonde clumps, and behind the thick glasses his magnified eyes were enormous, the pale flat blue of robin's eggs. "How's that?" He held up the drawing, and Sharon said it was fine. Then he signed his name in tiny peaked letters across the bottom of it, like an electrocardiogram, which she didn't expect. Something about him doing this tugged at her heart. Sharon drank more coffee while he ran off 4 copies of the recipe booklet. He'd do 500 more later if her committee approved. Raymond put these copies into a large, flat manila envelope and handed it to her with a flourish and a strange little half-bow. Then somehow, in the midst of standing up and thanking him and taking the envelope, she was all in a flurry, Sharon cut her hand on the flap of the envelope. It was a long, bright cut, a half-moon curve in the soft part of her hand between thumb and index finger. "Oh," she said. "Oh, my God," Raymond said dramatically. Together they watched while the blood came up slowly, like little red beads on a string. Then Raymond seized her hand and brought it to his mouth and kissed it. Kissed the cut. When Sharon jerked her hand away, it left a red smear, a blood stain, on his cheek. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Raymond cried, following Sharon out as she fled through the makeup section at the pharmacy where Miss Harrington was looking at lipstick and that older red-headed lady was working the cash register, and where nobody, apparently, had noticed anything. "I'll call you about the recipe book," Sharon tossed back over her shoulder. It was only from years of doing everything right that she was able to be so polite. Or was it? Because what had happened, anyway? Nothing, really. Just not a thing. But Sharon sat in her car for a long time before she started back toward home, not minding how the hot seat burned the backs of her legs. Then, on the way, she tried to remember everything she had ever known about Raymond Stewart. He was younger. He'd been 3 or 4 years behind Sharon in school. Everybody used to call him Highwater because he wore his pants so short that you could always see his little white socks, his little white ankles. He'd been a slight, awkward boy, known for forgetting his books and losing his papers and saying things in class that were totally beside the point. Supposedly, though, he was bright. Sharon had had one class with him because he had advanced placement in something. She couldn't remember what now, some kind of English class. How odd that he'd never gone on to college. What Sharon did remember, vividly, was Raymond's famous 2-year stint as drum major for the high school after her graduation. Sharon, then a young married woman sitting in the bleachers with her husband, had seen him in this role again and again. Before Leonard Lee was born, Sharon went to all the games with Leonard, who used to be the quarterback. So she was right there the first time Raymond Stewart, wearing a top hat, white gloves, white boots, and an electric blue sequined suit, which, it was rumored, he had designed himself, came strutting and dancing across the field, leading the band like a professional. Nobody ever saw anything like it. He'd strut, spin, toss his baton so high it seemed lost in the stars, then leap up to catch it and land in a split. Sharon remembered remarking to Leonard once at a game that she could hardly connect this Raymond Stewart, the drum major, wheeling like a dervish across the field below them, with that funny little guy who had been, she thought, in her English class. The little guy who wore such high pants. Well, Leonard had said then, after some deliberation, and Leonard was no dummy, well, maybe it just took him a while to find the right clothes. Raymond had a special routine he did while the band played Blue Suede Shoes and formed itself into a giant shoe on the field. Everybody in the band had showed more spunk and rhythm then, Sharon thought, than any of them had ever shown before, or since, for that matter. Under Raymond's leadership, the band won 2 AAA #1 championships, an all-time record for Roxborough High. They even went to play at the Apple Blossom Festival the year the governor's daughter was crowned queen, all because of Raymond Stewart. And just what had Raymond done since? After his father's suicide, which must have happened around the end of his senior year, he had turned nervous for a while. He had gone to work at Stewart's Pharmacy and had continued to live with his mother in their big old nubby green concrete house on Sunset Street. Everybody said something should be done about the house, the shameful way Raymond Stewart had let it run down. Since the leaves had not been raked for years and years, all the grass had died. That carefully tended, long, sloping lawn, which used to be Paul Stewart's pride and joy back in the days when he walked to work every morning in his gleaming white pharmacist's jacket with a flower in his buttonhole, speaking to everybody. Paint was peeling from the dark green shutters now, and some of them hung at crazy angles. The hedge had grown halfway up the windows. The side porch was completely engulfed in wisteria, with vines as thick as your arm. It was just a shame. Of course, Raymond Stewart wouldn't notice anything like that, or think about raking leaves. And his mother, Miss Suetta, was as crazy as a coot. Raymond hired somebody to stay with her all the time. The Stewarts had plenty of money, of course, but Miss Suetta thought she was dirt poor. She'd sneak off from her companion and hitchhike to town and go into stores and pick out things, and then cry and say she didn't have any money. So the salespeople would charge whatever it was to Raymond, and then they'd call him to come and get her and drive her home. Sharon had been hearing stories about Miss Suetta Stewart for years and years. But about Raymond, what else? Every Sunday he played the organ at the First Methodist Church in a stirring and dramatic way. The whole choir, including Sharon's Aunt Marge, was completely devoted to him. They all called him Ramon. And he had had his picture in the paper last year for helping to organize the Shady Mountain Players, an amateur theatrical group which so far had put on only one show about a big rabbit. Sharon saw that, but she couldn't remember if Raymond had had a part in it or not. Mainly you thought of Raymond in connection with weddings. Everybody consulted Raymond about wedding plans or interior decoration. Several of Sharon's friends had hired him, in fact. What he did was help you pick your colors through your astral sign. He didn't order anything for you. He just advised. In fact, come to think of it, Sharon herself had ordered some new business cards from Raymond Stewart several years ago for Leonard when he got his promotion. Gray stock with maroon lettering, which Leonard hadn't liked. Leonard said they looked gay. When he found out where she got them, he said it figured, because Raymond Stewart was probably gay too. Sharon smiled at this memory now, driving home. How funny to find that she knew so much about him after all. How funny that he'd been right here all along, that you could live in the same town with somebody all these years and just simply never notice them, never think of them once as a person. This idea made Sharon feel so weird she wished she'd never thought it up in the first place. Then she pulled into her driveway, and there was Margaret playing with the hose, pointing it down to drill holes in the soft black dirt of the flower bed. "Stop it! You stop it right now!" Sharon jerked her daughter's little shoulder much harder than she meant to, grabbing the hose. Later, after Margaret had run in the house yelling and Sharon had turned off the water, she stood out in the heat with the dripping hose and stared, just stared, at the row of little pines that Leonard had planted all along the back of their property, noticing for the first time how much they had grown since he set them out there 6 years ago when they'd built the house. The pines were big now, as symmetrical as Christmas trees, their green needles glistening in the sun. Sharon thought she might try to draw them. Then she burst into tears. And when Raymond Stewart came by her house in early September to deliver the PTA's 500 recipe booklets, she went to bed with him. Raymond was an ardent, imaginative lover. Sometimes he brought her some candy from the pharmacy. Sometimes he brought flowers. Once he brought her a butterfly, still alive, and kissed her on the mouth when she let it go. Sometimes he dressed up for her. He'd wear one of his father's pinstriped suits, or a Panama hat and army green Bermuda shorts with 8 pockets, or a dashiki and sandals, or mechanic's coveralls with Mike stitched on the pocket, or jeans and a Jack Daniels cap. Honestly, Sharon would say, because Raymond thought she was beautiful, she came to like her large, soft body. She loved the way he made everything seem so special. She loved the way he talked, his high-pitched, zany laugh, and how he stroked her tumbling hair. He was endlessly fascinated by how she spent her day, by all the dumb details of her life. Oh, but there was no time, it seemed, at first, and no place to go. 2 hours once a week at Sharon's, once Margaret had been deposited at Mother's morning out, or late afternoon in the creepy old Sutton house, after the boys came home from school to watch Margaret, while Miss Suetta went to group therapy at the Senior Citizens Center with her companion. Miss Suetta hated both group therapy and her companion. Sharon lay giggling in Raymond's 4-poster bed on these occasions, aware that if she'd ever acted so silly in her own house, Leonard would have sent her packing years ago. But Raymond gave her Scuppernong wine in little green-stemmed crystal glasses. The strong autumn sun came slanting across his bed. The wine was sweet. Raymond was blind as a bat without his glasses. Oh, she could have stayed there forever, covering his whole little face, his whole body with kisses. Raymond had a way of framing things with words that made them special. He gave events a title. For their affair, he had adopted a kind of a wise guy voice and a way of talking out the side of his mouth, like somebody in The Godfather. "Me and my baby sip Scuppernong wine," he'd say, to nobody, rolling his eyes. Or, "Me and my baby take in a show." When once they actually did this, the following summer, when Sharon's kids spent the night with her mother and Leonard went to the National Guard. Raymond picked an arty movie for them to see, named The Night of the Shooting Stars, and they drove over to Greenville together to see it after meeting in a 7-Eleven at the city limits, where Sharon left her car. The Night of the Shooting Stars turned out to be very weird, in Sharon's opinion, and not anything we'd really want to make a movie about. But Raymond thought it was great. Later, on the way back, he drove down a dirt road off the highway and parked in the warm, rustling woods. "Me and my baby make out," Raymond crowed, pulling her into his arms. Oh, it was crazy. And it got worse. They grew greedier and greedier. Several times, Raymond had just left by the back door when Leonard came in at the front. Several times, going or coming, Sharon encountered Raymond's mother, who never seemed to notice until the day Sharon picked her up hitchhiking downtown and drove her back to the house on Sunset Street. Just before Miss Suetta went in the front door, she stopped dead in her tracks and turned to point a long, skinny finger back at Sharon. "Just who is this woman?" she asked loudly. And then her companion came and thanked Sharon and guided Miss Suetta inside. By this time, of course, Sharon called him Ramon. After 2 years, he finally talked her into going to a motel, the new Ramada Inn in Greenville. Built on a grander scale than anything else in the county, this Ramada Inn was really more like a hotel, he told her, promising saunas and a sunken bar and an indoor pool and Nautilus equipment. "You know I wouldn't do any of that," said Sharon. Leonard had to go out of town on a selling trip anyway. Leonard can sell or trade anything, which is what he does for the coal company he works for. For instance, he will trade a piece of land for a warehouse, or a rear-end loader for a computer. Sharon doesn't know exactly what Leonard does, but he was out of town, so she let Alistair and Leonard Lee spend the night with their friends and asked her mother to keep Margaret. Why? Her mother had asked. Well, I've been spotting between my periods, Sharon said smoothly, and Dr. King wants me to go over to Greenville for some tests. She could lie like a rug. But before Sharon saw Raymond with new eyes, she had never lied in her whole life. Sharon felt wonderful and terrible checking into the Ramada Inn with Raymond as Mr. and Mrs. John Deere. The clerk didn't bat an eye. This Ramada was as fancy, as imposing as advertised. Their room was actually a suite, with a color TV and the promised sunken tub, and a king-size bed under a tufted velvet spread, and a big brass lamp as large as Margaret. Sharon stifled a sob. She was feeling edgy and kind of blue. It was one thing to find an hour here and an hour there, but another thing to do this. All I want for Christmas is to sleep with you all night long, Raymond had said. Sharon wanted this too, but she hadn't thought it would be so hard. She looked around the room. How much did this cost? She asked. Oh, not much. Anyway, I've got plenty of money, Raymond said airily, and Sharon stared at him. This was true, but she always forgot it. Raymond went out for ice and came back and made 2 big blue drinks out of rum and a bottled mix. The drinks looked like Windex. Me and my baby go Hawaiian, Raymond said gravely, clicking his glass against hers. Then they got drunk and had a wonderful time. The next morning, Sharon was terrified of seeing somebody she knew, but it turned out that nobody at all was around. Nobody. Raymond joked about this as they walked down the long, pale corridor. He made his voice into a Rod Sterling Twilight Zone voice. They think they're checking out of the Ghost Motel, he said. Then Sharon imagined that they had really died in a wreck on the way to the motel, only they didn't know it. When they turned a corner and saw themselves reflected in a mirror in the lobby, she screamed. She screams, but no one can hear her in the Ghost Motel, said Raymond. He carried his clothes in a laundry bag. No, hush, I mean it, Sharon said. She looked in the mirror while Raymond paid the bill, and it seemed to her then that she was wavy and insubstantial, and that Raymond, when he came up behind her, was nothing but air. They held hands tightly and didn't talk, all the way back to the 7-Eleven where Sharon had parked her car. And now Raymond is all excited about the Eclipse. He's been talking about it for weeks. He's just like a kid. Sharon's real kids, Leonard Lee and Alistair and Margaret, have been studying eclipses at school, but they couldn't care less. I want to be with you, baby, to view the eclipse. Raymond had said this to Sharon again and again. He has made them both little contraptions out of cardboard with peepholes so they won't burn their retinas. Luckily, the eclipse is set for 1:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, so the children are at school. Leonard is at work. Raymond arrived promptly at 1, dressed in his father's white pharmacist's jacket. I thought I ought to look scientific, he says, twirling around in Sharon's kitchen to give her the full effect. His high giggle ricochets off the kitchen cabinets. He has brought a bottle of pink champagne. He pops the cork with a flourish and offers her a glass, which Sharon accepts gladly, because in truth, she's not feeling so good. It's funny how that lie she told her mother a couple of months ago seems to be coming true. Probably her uterus is just falling apart. The truth is, she's getting old. Sometimes she feels just ancient, 100 years older than Raymond. Sharon sips the champagne slowly, while Raymond opens all of her kitchen cabinets and pokes around inside them. What are you looking for? She finally asks. Why, nothing. When Raymond smiles, his face breaks into crinkles all over. He clasps her forcefully. I like to see where you keep things, he says. You're an endless mystery to me, baby. He kisses her, then pulls out a pocket watch she's never seen before. Perhaps he bought it just for the eclipse. 1:12, he says. Come on, you heavenly body, you. It's time to go outside. In spite of herself, Sharon has gotten excited too. They take plastic lawn chairs and sit down right in the middle of the backyard, near the basketball goal, but well away from the pines, where they can get the most open view. It's a cloudless day in early March. Sharon's daffodils are blooming. She has thought this all through ahead of time. The only neighbor with a view of her backyard, Mrs. Hodges, is gone all day. Raymond refills his glass with champagne. Sharon's lettuce is coming up, she notices, in crinkly little waves at the end of the garden. But Raymond is telling her what will happen next, lecturing her in a deep scientific voice which makes him sound exactly like the guy on Wild Kingdom. When the moon passes directly between the earth and the sun, so that its shadow falls upon the earth, there's a solar eclipse, visible from the part of the earth's surface on which the shadow lies. So it's the shadow of the moon which will pass across us. I don't care. Sharon nearly screams it. All I want, she thinks, honey, all I ever want is you. Raymond sits stiffly upright in her plastic lawn chair, his head leaning to the side in a practiced, casual manner, lecturing about the umbra and penumbra. He has smoothed his spiky blonde hair down for this occasion, and it gleams in the early spring sun. A total solar eclipse occurs only once in every 400 years in any one place. Actually, this won't be a total eclipse, not where we are. If we'd driven over to Greensboro, we would have been right in the center of it. For a minute, his face falls. Maybe we should have done that. Oh, no, Sharon assures him. I think this is just fine. She sips her champagne while Raymond shows her how to look through the little box in order to see the eclipse. Raymond consults his watch. 1:15. Mrs. Hodges' golden retriever, Ralph, starts barking. Dogs will bark, Raymond intones. Animals will go to bed. Pregnant women will have their babies. Birds will cease to twitter. Twitter? Sharon says. Well, they sure are twittering now. Sharon has a lot of birds because of the bird feeder Alistair made in Shop 2. Trust me, it's coming, said Raymond. While Sharon and Raymond sit in her backyard with their boxes on their knees, waiting, Sharon has a sudden, awful view of them from somewhere else. A view of how they must look, doing this, drinking champagne. It's so wild. Ralph barks and the birds twitter, and then, just as Raymond promised, they cease. Ralph ceases too. Raymond squeezes Sharon's hand. A hush falls. A shadow falls. The very air seems to thicken suddenly, to darken around them. But still it's not dark. It's the weirdest thing Sharon has ever seen. It's like it's getting colder, too, all of a sudden. She bets the temperature has dropped at least 10 degrees. Oh, baby, oh, honey, Raymond says. Through the peephole in her cardboard box, Sharon sees the moon, a dark object moving across the sun's face and shutting more and more of its bright surface from view, and then it's really twilight. Me and my baby view the eclipse, says Raymond. Sharon starts crying. The sun is nothing now but a crazy shining crescent, a ghost sun. Funny shadows run all over everything, all over Sharon's garden, her house, her pine trees, the basketball goal, all over Raymond. His white jacket seems alive, dimly rippling. Sharon feels exactly like somebody big is walking on her grave. Then the shadows are gone, and it's nearly dark. Sharon can see stars. Raymond kisses her, and then the eclipse is over. It was just like they said it would be, he says. Just exactly. He's very excited. Then they go to bed, and when Margaret comes home from school, he's still there, in the hall bathroom. Hi, honey, says Sharon, who ran quickly into the kitchen when she first heard Margaret, so as to appear busy. Sharon moves things around in the refrigerator. Who's that? Margaret drops her knapsack and points straight at Raymond. who has chosen just this moment to come out of the bathroom waving Sharon's new dustbuster. Margaret is a skinny, freckled little girl who's mostly serious. Now she's in the first grade. "What's this?" Raymond waves the dustbuster. He's delighted by gadgets, but whenever he buys one, it breaks. "I'll show you," Margaret says. She demonstrates the dustbuster while Raymond buttons his daddy's white pharmacy jacket. "See?" Margaret says gravely. "That's amazing," Raymond says. Sharon, watching them, thinks she will die. But Raymond leaves before the boys get home, and Margaret doesn't mention him until the next afternoon. "He was nice," Margaret says then. "Who, honey?" Sharon is frying chicken. "That man who was here? Who was he?" Margaret asks again. "Oh, just nobody," Sharon says, because it's true. Her affair with Raymond Stewart is over now, as suddenly and as mysteriously as it began. Sharon aches with loss. When she tells Raymond, he'll be upset, as she is upset. But he'll live, as she will. He'll find things to do. He has just been given the part of Ben in the Shady Mountain Players production of The Glass Menagerie, for instance, a part he's always wanted. He'll be okay. Sharon plans to say, "Raymond, I will never love anyone in the world as much as I love you." This is absolutely true. She loves him. She will love him forever with a fierce, sweet love that will never die. For Raymond Stewart will never change. He'll grow older, more eccentric. People will point him out. Although their mothers will tell them not to, children will follow him in the street, begging him to talk funny and make faces. Maybe he'll have girlfriends, but nobody will ever love him as much as Sharon. He's shown her things. She knows this. And oh, she'll be around. She'll run into Raymond from time to time, choosing Leonard's new business cards, for instance, when Leonard gets another promotion, or making up the Art Guild flyer, or, years and years from now, ordering Margaret's wedding invitations. The story, Me and My Baby View the Eclipse, was published in the 1990 collection of the same name and is read here by permission of the author. We hope you don't keep Alabama Aloud all to yourself. Subscribe to our podcast and share it with a friend. Better yet, write us a review in the iTunes store. It helps other people find the podcast. Also, give us a shout-out on social media. Alabama Aloud is a production of Troy Public Radio and produced by Austin Toy and Kyle Gassett. Special thanks to Matt Clower, Buddy Johnson, and Michelle Mowry. Alabama Aloud is made possible in part by a grant from Alabama State Council on the Arts. So, until next time, when you'll hear more of Alabama Read Aloud, I'm Don Noble. Thanks for listening.